"But if I close this sale, I quit," shouted the Millionaire CEO, humiliating the new poor intern, Lucia. The impossible task: to sell the new luxury project to Mr. Tavares, the toughest and most reclusive client in Rio de Janeiro, a man who hated the construction company. In front of everyone, Lucia took her phone, made a single call and put it on speakerphone. The millionaire heard the client's response. His face went pale and he collapsed in his chair. He knew his career was over. The main hall of Alden Holdings crackled with a mix of panic and electricity. The air conditioning, normally an ice-cold breath of efficiency, seemed unable to dissipate the tension emanating from the imposing figure in the center of the room. James Alden Jr., J.R., to all, heir to a vast fortune and CEO by birthright, not by merit, ran his hands through his perfectly coiffed hair, his face red with fury. His expensive gold watch glittered under the cool office lights, a stark contrast to the dullness in his employees' eyes. He had built an empire on his father's legacy, turning the family business into a cash machine. But today, that machine had jammed. No one dared to look at him directly. Eyes were fixed on computer screens, on meaningless reports, on anywhere but the boss's stormy face. The sale of the new luxury penthouse on Billionaires Row, the crown jewel of the development firm, had stalled. Weeks of failure were piling up. And J.R., his patience, a resource far scarcer than his capital, had completely run out. His gaze swept the room with contempt, passing over experienced managers and veteran salespeople, all cowering under the weight of his wrath. And then his eyes landed on Lucy, the new intern, seated at a modest desk in the corner. She looked like a small, out-of-place sparrow among the corporate peacocks. Her clothes were simple but impeccably clean. Her hair was pulled back in a tidy bun, and her expression, unlike everyone else's, was one of serene calm. She was organizing a small stack of papers, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the brewing storm. J.R. had hired her reluctantly, caving to his father's inexplicable insistence, who saw a potential in the girl from a poor background that he simply couldn't fathom. To him, she was just a constant reminder of a world he despised. "You're all a bunch of incompetents," he yelled, his voice echoing through the dead silence. "You know what? I bet even she," he gestured dismissively toward Lucy, "could do a better job or not." A cruel, smug smile curved his lips. He strode over to her desk, the sound of his expensive Italian loafers marking the rhythm of the humiliation. "Let's run a little test, Lucy. Call Mr. Harrison now." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Harrison, nicknamed the Ghost of Park Avenue, wasn't just the toughest client in the country. He was a legend, a reclusive billionaire whose wealth was as vast as his temper was volatile. Worse, he harbored a deep, historic grudge against the Alden family, a wound from an old land dispute that J.R., his father, swore was settled, but whose scars remained. Harrison didn't just refuse calls from Alden Holdings. He repelled them with an icy fury that disarmed even the most seasoned negotiators. "Call him in front of me." On speaker, J.R. ordered, savoring every word. "I'll give you a challenge. If you close this sale, I'll resign." Nervous, complicit laughter echoed through the room. Lucy's humiliation was a spectacle, a temporary relief from the boss's fury. Without changing her calm expression, Lucy looked up and met J.R.'s eyes. She picked up her simple smartphone, a device that looked like a relic next to the latest models on the other desks. She didn't look for the number in the office directory. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her fingers moving with a quiet familiarity. The phone rang once before it was answered. "Hello?" A gruff, impatient voice rasped through the speaker, sharp as broken glass. J.R. crossed his arms. A victorious smirk plastered on his face. It was the sound of her imminent failure. "Hi, Grandpa. It's me, Lucy said, her voice sweet and soft, a melody in the cacophony of tension. The voice on the other end of the line changed instantly. The harshness melted, the impatience evaporated, replaced by a warmth that seemed to fill the entire room. "My princess, I thought you were only calling tonight. Did something happen? Are you okay at that new job of yours?" J's smirk froze. His jaw dropped. He heard the reply from the most feared client in New York City and sat down heavily in his leather chair, the blood draining from his face. He knew with terrifying clarity that his career was over. "I'm fine, Grandpa," Lucy said, her gaze fixed, piercing J.R.'s soul. "It's just, my boss, Mr. Alden, challenged me. He said he'd give me the company if I could sell you the penthouse on Billionaires Row." There was a dead silence from the other end of the line, a vacuum so heavy it seemed to suck all the air from the room. Then Mr. Harrison's voice returned, but all the tenderness was gone. Now it was as cold as steel. "Put me on speaker, Lucy." She complied. The voice of the most powerful man in the city echoed, each syllable carrying an unquestionable authority. "J.R. Harrison here. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings. I am the silent backer of this company. I guaranteed the loans that saved your father from bankruptcy on one condition, that my granddaughter, whom I raised hidden from the world so she could have a normal life, would be treated with dignity when she chose to learn about the business. You just broke the deal. The company is no longer yours." The soft click of Lucy's phone as she ended the call was the only sound to break the petrified silence that had fallen over the Alden Holdings hall. It was a heavy, dense silence, filled with unasked questions and collective shock. The faces, once twisted in sneering smiles, were now frozen in masks of pure disbelief. The employees looked from J.R., whose face had lost all color, to Lucy, the intern who in less than 2 minutes had imploded their universe. J.R., who moments ago was the sun around which all the planets of this office revolved, now seemed like a ghost in his own chair. He rose slowly, a stiff, uncoordinated movement, as if his limbs no longer belonged to him. His eyes, once burning with fury and arrogance, were now empty, glazed over. Humiliation was an icy wave washing over him, paralyzing his thoughts. His mind, normally a sharp calculator of profits and dividends, was a maelstrom of denial. This couldn't be real. The legacy he managed, the fortune he had multiplied with risky investments in tech stocks and even crypto, couldn't just slip through his fingers because of a girl. He looked at Lucy, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not the insignificant intern, but the granddaughter of Arthur Harrison, the heiress to one of the country's greatest fortunes, the secret piece on her grandfather's complex business chessboard. An impotent rage boiled in his chest but found no outlet. There were no words, no gestures. There was only defeat, absolute and crushing. Without a single word, he turned and walked toward his office, his once firm and authoritative steps now sounding dragged and hollow on the polished marble floor. The glass door closed behind him, sealing him in with the wreckage of his career. With the deposed CEO's exit, all attention turned magnetically to Lucy. The weight of those stairs was almost physical. She felt a slight tremor in her hands and hid them under the desk, clasping them together. Her heart was racing. She hadn't planned this. When she left home that morning, her only goal was to learn, to observe, to understand how the world of big business that her grandfather had built, but always kept her away from to protect her, actually worked. J.R.'s humiliation had forced her hand, forcing her to use the only weapon she possessed. But she had never wanted a war, much less the crown. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of sadness and dread. Sadness for having exposed a man that way, however much he deserved it, and dread for what would come next. Her simple, anonymous life, her small apartment, her quiet walks in the park, it all seemed suddenly distant, like a photograph of a lost past. The murmuring started low, a hum that soon grew in volume. People who had never spoken a word to her now looked at her with a fearful reverence. The secretary, who once ignored her, now seemed eager to offer her a glass of water. Amid the quiet chaos, one man stood out from the crowd. It was Robert, the chief financial officer, a man with graying hair and a weary gaze, known for his competence and for being one of the few voices of reason in J.R.'s tempestuous management. He approached Lucy's desk with cautious steps. Like one approaching a powerful, frightened animal, he stopped before her, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. The entire room held its breath again, waiting to see what would happen. Robert looked at the young woman, whose face still held a forced calm, and saw the uncertainty in her eyes. He knew that the stability of the entire company, the jobs of hundreds of families, depended on her answer. "Miss Harrison," he said, the formality sounding strange and new. "What should we do now? What are your orders?" Robert's question hung in the air, laden with the weight of 100 futures. "What are your orders?" The word orders sounded alien, almost violent to Lucy's ears. She had never given an order in her life, except to herself, to get out of bed on difficult mornings. The silence that followed the question was different from before. It wasn't a silence of shock, but of expectation. All eyes were fixed on her, searching for a sign, a direction, a glimpse of the woman who now held the company's fate in her hands. For a moment, panic threatened to breach the dam of her composure. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the quiet room. What did she know about running a multi-million-dollar company? Her knowledge of Alden Holdings' vast assets and liabilities was limited to reports she herself had organized, never imagining she would one day be responsible for them. The responsibility was an invisible monster, tightening its grip on her throat. She felt a sudden dizziness, the office lights seeming to flicker before her eyes. Then, amid the whirlwind of her thoughts, her grandfather's calm voice echoed in her memory. It was from years ago, when as a child she had gotten lost for a few minutes in a busy market. He had found her sitting on a step, tears streaming down her face. He didn't scold her, he just knelt in front of her and said, with the tenderness the business world now knew, "When you don't know what to do, my princess, and you feel lost, just take a deep breath and do the next right thing in front of you. Breathe." That was the right thing to do. Lucy took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs and calm the chaos within. She looked up and met Robert's gaze, who was watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She didn't have all the answers, and pretending she did would be the first mistake. "I don't have any orders, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly firm and clear. "What I have is a request." She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. "I ask that everyone return to their desks and continue their work. The stability of this company and our cash flow don't depend on one person, but on the effort of every single one of us. Your work is important." She looked around, trying to make eye contact with as many people as possible. "I know this is a moment of uncertainty, but I ask for your trust. We will have an all-hands meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the next steps. For now, let's maintain calm and normalcy." Her message was simple, devoid of J.R.'s arrogance, but filled with a sincerity many there hadn't heard in years. A murmur of relief swept through the room. People began to disperse, returning to their workstations, conversations restarting in lower, more urgent tones. Lucy saw the relief on Robert's face, but she also noticed the sidelong glance from Sandra, the ambitious sales manager, whose face wore a clear expression of disdain and skepticism. A new conflict was already brewing on the horizon, as normalcy, or a fragile imitation of it, began to settle in. Lucy sat back down. The adrenaline started to fade, giving way to a profound exhaustion. She looked at her humble smartphone, the unexpected weapon that had changed everything. The device vibrated on the desk, the name Grandpa glowing on the screen. Her heart leapt. She answered, her hand trembling slightly. "Princess?" His voice came through, back to its usual caring tone, but with an underlying note of urgency. "Yes, Grandpa," she replied, almost in a whisper. "Yeah, you did very well. I'm proud," he said, "but we don't have time to waste. I need you to do something for me, and it's very important. You need to go to J.R.'s father's old office, the one he used before he retired. Behind the painting of the sailboat, there's a safe. The combination is your birth date with the full year." Lucy held her breath. "Inside, you'll find a blue leather folder. Take it, and don't show it to anyone." "Understood. I'll be there in an hour to pick you up." "I'll be there in an hour." Her grandfather's words echoed in Lucy's mind, a timer that had just been set, infusing urgency into every beat of her heart. She stood up, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a new kind of energy, a mix of fear and determination. The office of James Alden Sr. was at the end of the hall, an almost forgotten sanctuary since he had stepped away from the day-to-day business, leaving the family's vast estate under his son's command. Walking down that hallway now was like crossing a minefield of stairs. Conversations ceased as she passed. Some employees turned their heads, feigning sudden concentration on their monitors. Others watched her openly, their eyes filled with a curiosity that bordered on awe or dread. She could feel the silent question in every glance. Who was she, really? In the crowd, Sandra's face stood out. The sales manager stared at her with crossed arms and a faint, contemptuous smile, a clear message that, to her, Lucy was still just the intern, an intruder in a game she didn't understand. Lucy ignored the stares and whispers, focusing only on the dark wooden door at the end of the hall. She pushed the polished brass handle and slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The contrast with the rest of the office was immediate and profound. While the main hall and J.R.'s office were monuments to modern design, with brushed steel, glass, and a cold color palette, Mr. Alden Sr.'s office was a haven of warmth and history. The walls were lined with dark wood panels filled with books. The air smelled of leather, old paper, and a faint hint of pipe tobacco, a ghost fragrance from years past. A large mahogany desk dominated the room, but it wasn't empty and impersonal like J.R.'s. It was covered with family photos in silver frames, a small model sailboat, and a mug with a Yankees logo. It was the office of a man who had built not just a fortune, but a life. Lucy's gaze swept the room, searching for the painting her grandfather had mentioned. There it was, on a side wall, an oil painting of a majestic sailboat navigating a turquoise sea. It was a serene, almost dreamlike image. With slightly trembling hands, Lucy approached and lifted the painting off the wall, revealing the metal dial of a built-in safe. She turned the dial, her fingers inputting the numbers of her birth date, 8 digits that contained her entire life. There was a metallic click, and the heavy safe door swung open. The interior was dark and austere. There were a few stacks of yellow documents tied with string, looking like ancient records of a long-guarded treasure, but in the center, resting on a red velvet shelf, was what her grandfather had described. A blue leather folder. It was elegant and felt like it contained something of considerable thickness. Lucy took it. The leather was smooth and cool to the touch. The weight was substantial. What could be inside that warranted such secrecy? What information was so vital that her grandfather, a man who controlled a business empire, needed it with such urgency? She felt a chill. Her intuition telling her that the contents of that folder would change everything she thought she knew. She closed the safe, put the painting back in place, and turned to leave, the blue folder clutched firmly in her hand. However, as she opened the door, she came face to face with Sandra, who was waiting outside, blocking her path. The contemptuous smile was gone, replaced by a hard, calculating expression. "May I ask what an intern was doing in the retired chairman's office?" Sandra asked, her voice low and hissing but sharp, her eyes fixed on the blue folder in Lucy's hand. "And what is that?" "Company documents are confidential assets. You have no authority to remove anything from this floor." Sandra's accusation hung between them, sharp as a blade. For a moment, Lucy felt her blood run cold. The sales manager was right, by the company's normal standards. An intern had no right to handle documents of that level, let alone remove them from a chairman's office. The blue leather folder in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed a ton, a burden of secrets she didn't understand, but now had a duty to protect. The earlier panic threatened to return, but the memory of her grandfather's calm, confident voice anchored her. She took a deep breath, meeting Sandra's challenging gaze with a serenity she didn't feel inside. "I understand your concern, Sandra," Lucy said, her voice even and professional. "You're right to be vigilant about company assets. However, I'm acting under direct and confidential instructions pertaining to the leadership transition." The answer was deliberately vague, but conveyed an authority Lucy didn't know she possessed. Sandra's eyes narrowed, not easily deterred. "Instructions from whom? As far as any of us know, you're still an intern. Unless some magic happened in the last half hour, you have no authority here." The venom in her voice was palpable. She took a step forward, her intent clear, to take the folder. The silent standoff stretched for a second that felt like an eternity. Lucy clutched the folder to her chest, her protective instincts overriding everything else. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew it was vital. Before the situation could escalate, a third voice intervened, calm and firm. Sandra, Robert J., the CFO, had approached without either of them noticing. "Miss Harrison is acting under a new directive. Please return to your work. We have a lot to do to ensure the stability of our business." Robert's endorsement, from a man respected by everyone in the company for his integrity and competence, was the blow Sandra hadn't expected. She looked from Robert to Lucy, her face twisting into a mask of frustration and contained anger. She knew she had lost this battle. Without another word, she spun around and stalked away, each sharp step an echo of her hostility. Lucy let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and offered a grateful look to Robert. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. He just nodded, a small, weary smile on his lips. "We're all in the same boat, miss. Just tell me which way to row." With that, he too walked away, leaving her finally alone in the hallway. Lucy leaned against the wall for a moment, her legs feeling weak. That brief confrontation had drained her more than the scene with J.R. There, she had been protected by her grandfather's power. With Sandra, she had been on her own, and the attack had been direct and personal. She walked to the large window at the end of the hall, which offered a panoramic view of New York City. The city sprawled below her, a vibrant metropolis indifferent to the drama unfolding in that skyscraper. The weight of the folder in her hands was the weight of a world she barely knew, a world of capital, complex investments, and a net worth her mind could hardly compute. The phone in her pocket buzzed. It was the front desk receptionist. "Miss Harrison, a Mr. Harrison has just arrived. Shall I send him up?" "No," Lucy replied, her voice regaining its firmness. "I'm coming down." She needed to meet her grandfather on neutral ground, away from prying eyes and listening ears. She pressed the elevator button, her heart pounding in anticipation. The doors slid open, revealing the empty car. During the short ride down, she caught her reflection in the polished steel mirror. The same Lucy as always stared back, but something in her eyes had changed. There was a new depth, a shadow of responsibility. When the doors opened in the lobby, she saw him. Her grandfather stood near the entrance, a pillar of strength and elegance. But the smile she expected wasn't there. In its place was a gravity that chilled her blood, a look of such profound concern that it frightened her. He looked at the blue folder in her hand and then at her, and she knew the real challenge was just beginning. The lobby of Alden Holdings, normally a bustling, impersonal space, seemed to shrink around the imposing presence of Arthur Harrison. Employees hurrying past slowed their pace, casting furtive glances at the man whose legend preceded his arrival. He ignored them all, his eyes fixed on Lucy as she crossed the marble floor. The worry on his face was so plain it formed a knot in her stomach. "Grandpa," she said, her voice low, almost inaudible amid the lobby's murmur. He didn't answer with words. He just placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and guided her out of the building toward a discreet black sedan waiting at the curb. The driver got out and opened the rear door, and only when they were both settled in the luxurious silence of the vehicle did he finally speak. "Are you all right, my princess?" he asked, his voice a mix of relief and anxiety. "Yes, Grandpa, just a little overwhelmed." She handed him the blue leather folder. Arthur Harrison took the folder, his gaze running over the familiar leather as if greeting an old friend. He didn't open it. Instead, he placed it on the seat between them, an object charged with a meaning Lucy did not yet understand. "You were brave today," he said, turning his attention back to her, "braver than I had any right to ask." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, looking down at her hands in her lap. "He was humiliating me. Humiliating everyone, I know, and that's why things have to change, once and for all." The car began to move, gliding smoothly through the downtown traffic. Lucy stared out the window, the familiar streets looking alien, as if she were seeing them through a new lens. "What's in this folder, Grandpa? Why all the mystery?" Arthur sighed, a heavy, weary sound. The story of how J.R.'s father almost drove this company into the ground, and the story of how I saved him. He began to narrate, his voice calm and methodical, unraveling a past Lucy knew nothing about. Years ago, James Alden Sr., a good-hearted man, but with a terrible instinct for high-risk investments, had gotten involved in a series of disastrous deals. He gambled a significant portion of the company's capital on volatile tech stocks, guided by promises of quick profits, and lost almost everything. Desperate, he took out loans with sky-high interest rates, sinking the company into debt. He was one step away from losing it all. Harrison continued. The legacy his own grandfather built, J.R.'s inheritance. He came to me in secret. He and I had our differences, the land dispute, but we were also childhood friends. I couldn't watch him lose everything. Harrison then made a bold move. He used his own funds, his vast personal fortune, to guarantee the loans, becoming the silent backer and majority shareholder of Alden Holdings. "I saved the company, but I imposed two conditions," he said, his tone hardening. The first was that Alden Sr. would retire and hand control to J.R., who, for all his arrogance, had a sharper mind for business. The second was you." Lucy turned to him, confused. "Me? What do I have to do with it? I wanted you to have the chance to learn about this world, if and when you chose to. I wanted you to have a safe place to start, a place where I could watch over you from a distance. The deal was that in exchange for my continued investment and my silence about who really controlled the company, you would be hired and treated with the utmost respect." J.R. never knew the details. His father just told him it was a debt of honor. The car pulled up in front of Lucy's apartment building, a simple, charming pre-war building, a far cry from the luxury developments the company sold. J.R. broke the deal. "Lucy, he didn't just disrespect you, he threatened the stability of everything we've built. And now, We have an even bigger problem. He finally opened the blue folder, revealing a series of bank statements and financial reports. "This here," he said, pointing to a specific line on one of the documents, "shows that J.R., over the last 6 months, has been siphoning large sums of money from the company. He's been making personal investments in high-risk crypto and obscure offshore funds, using the company's cash flow as his private bank. The sale of the Billionaire's Row penthouse wasn't just a matter of pride for him. It was a necessity. He desperately needs that money to cover a hole he created himself." Lucy's jaw dropped. J.R.'s arrogance wasn't just a personality trait. It was a smokescreen to hide fraud. The company she now, theoretically, controlled was in far greater financial peril than anyone imagined, and the only proof of it was in that blue folder on her lap. The revelation hit Lucy like an avalanche. The car's luxurious interior suddenly felt suffocating. The New York City streets outside a meaningless blur. J.R. wasn't just an arrogant tyrant. He was an embezzler, risking the livelihoods of hundreds of employees to fuel his own secret investments. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. This was no longer about a public humiliation or a power shift. It was about a financial black hole that could sink the entire company, taking with it the jobs and lives of so many people. The responsibility she now felt was 1,000 times heavier than it had been in the office. She looked at the documents in the blue folder, at the columns of numbers representing the siphoned capital, the wealth that had been put at risk. This wasn't a game. It was the future of a company her grandfather had saved, and that now, somehow, she had to save too. What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice faint. Arthur Harrison closed the folder with a decisive snap. The worried look on his face had been replaced by a cold determination, the mask of the ruthless billionaire he became when his interests were threatened. "We're going to do what's necessary," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Tomorrow, at the meeting, you will expose this. With this proof, the board will have no choice but to ratify my decision. We will take full and public control. We'll initiate a full audit, trace these funds, and recover every last cent. The Alden fortune will not be rebuilt at the expense of mine." He spoke with the precision of a general planning a battle, each word an order, each sentence a strategy. But to Lucy, it sounded like a sentence of destruction. She didn't want to destroy the Alden family. As much as she hated what J.R. had done, the image of James Alden Sr., the man from the photos on the desk, the builder of model sailboats, saddened her. He had already lost the company once. Now he would lose his son's reputation and the family legacy forever. "But, Grandpa, this will—" she began, but was cut off by the shrill ring of Arthur's phone. He glanced at the screen, and a dark, ironic smile crossed his lips. "Speak of the devil," he said, showing the screen to Lucy. The name Alden glowed on the caller ID. Probably J.R., calling to beg or threaten. Let's hear what the rat has to say when he's cornered. With a tap, he answered the call and activated the speakerphone, the air in the car growing even thinner. "Arthur," a voice said, but it wasn't J.R.'s voice. It wasn't young or arrogant or desperate. It was an older voice, weary, but with a steel timbre beneath the surface. It was the voice of James Alden Sr. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. Her grandfather's smile faltered, replaced by a cautious surprise. "James," Arthur said, using his old friend's first name, "I figured you'd call. I know what you did, Arthur, and I know, my son, that your granddaughter is with you." James Alden's voice came through, the calculated pause not going unnoticed. "I know you have the blue folder." There was a moment of tense silence. "Then you know what your son has been doing," Harrison retorted, his voice regaining its hardness. "You know he was stealing from the company." "He wasn't stealing," James said, and the calmness in his voice was more frightening than any shout. "He was following my orders. The money he moved wasn't for personal investments. It was the first step in a plan to raise enough capital to activate a clause in our original agreement. A clause you, in your arrogance, seem to have forgotten. Arthur Harrison went rigid. Lucy saw the blood drain from her grandfather's face, the same pallor she had seen on J.R.'s face hours earlier. A clause that gives me the right to buy back the entirety of your shares at the original value of your investment, nullifying all interest and dividends. If it can be proven that you directly interfered in the company's management and putting your granddaughter in there and using her to fire my son, Arthur, that is the most direct interference one can imagine. You didn't start a house cleaning. You just handed us the weapon we needed to take our company back. The call ended. James Alden's voice dissipated, but his words remained, suspended in the car's dense air like a poisonous fog. The silence that followed was heavier and deeper than any Lucy had ever experienced. She looked at her grandfather, the man who had always been her rock, her safe harbor, and saw him shaken to his core. Arthur Harrison's face, normally a mask of control and authority forged by decades of ruthless negotiations, was pale. His knuckles were white where he gripped the blue leather folder, his only trophy in a victory that had turned out to be a trap. He didn't move. He just stared at the traffic ahead, his eyes seeing not the cars and buildings, but the chessboard of his life, where he had just been checkmated in a way he never foresaw. Lucy felt his shock like a physical wave. The fear she had felt for herself during the day was replaced by an overwhelming fear for him. To see him like this, vulnerable and exposed, was like watching a mountain tremble. "Grandpa," she whispered, breaking the fragile silence. Was he telling the truth? Is there really a clause like that? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he let out a slow breath, a sigh that carried the weight of years of wounded pride. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse, devoid of its usual resonance. "It exists." He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw a storm of emotions, fury, disbelief, and, what shocked her most, a sliver of reluctant admiration. "When I saved the company, James insisted on that clause. I saw it as a sentimental concession, a way for him to keep his pride, the fantasy that he might one day regain control. I never thought he'd have the capital to activate it. I underestimated him. I underestimated his desperation and his cunning." He explained the devastating implications. The clause would not only force him to sell his shares, but to sell them at the original investment value, with no adjustments for inflation, no interest, no accumulated dividends over the years. It would be as if his financial rescue had never generated any return. He wouldn't just lose control of the company. He would lose a substantial part of his personal fortune, a wealth of profits he had considered guaranteed. But the embezzlement, the fraud, Lucy argued, her mind refusing to accept defeat. Doesn't that void the clause? He didn't call it fraud, Lucy. He called it raising capital, Harrison said, bitterness twisting his lips. They'll argue it was a risky but legitimate financial maneuver for a contractual purpose. And my interference, your phone call, that was the trigger they needed to legitimize it all. They provoked me. They led me to act exactly as they wanted. The anger in his voice was now directed not at James or J.R., but at himself. I fell for it like a rookie, my pride, my desire to protect you. They used it against me. Lucy reached out and, hesitating for a moment, touched his arm. The expensive fabric of his suit couldn't hide the tension in his muscles. "It's not your fault, Grandpa. You were just trying to protect me." He looked at her hand on his arm and covered it with his own, a gesture of gratitude amid his inner turmoil. He fell silent again, his eyes lost in the distance as his brilliant mind replayed the events of the past months, the past weeks, today. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, not in the way he thought, but into a new, sinister and perfectly planned picture. The sales team's consistent failures, J.R.'s mounting pressure, the humiliating scene in the office. Suddenly he sat bolt upright, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. It hadn't been a coincidence. It wasn't a simple act of J.R.'s arrogance. It was a script, a meticulously staged play for an audience of one, him, and he had played his part perfectly. He turned to Lucy, and the look in his eyes made her hold her breath. The anger and despair were gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. They didn't want J.R. to sell the penthouse, he said, his voice low and tense. They needed him to fail again and again to create the perfect scenario for the humiliation. They didn't give me a choice. They backed me into a corner so I would act. They used me, princess, and they used you as the bait. The bait. The word lodged in Lucy's mind, cold and barbed. For a moment, she felt a wave of nausea. Her entire presence at Alden Holdings, every contemptuous look from J.R., every menial task she had performed, it had all been part of a macabre choreography, and she was the lead puppet, unaware of the strings. She felt exposed, used. But then, beneath the humiliation, something stronger began to emerge. An ember of quiet rage. They had underestimated her, all of them. J.R. saw her as a nobody. James saw her as a tool. Even her grandfather, with all his love, saw her as a princess to be protected. No one had seen her as a player. That mistake, she decided in that instant, would be their downfall. She sat up straighter in her seat, the movement subtle, but the shift in her posture was total. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a focused stillness that surprised her grandfather. "They used me, Grandpa," she said, her voice low but vibrating with a new intensity. "Now, it's my turn to use what they gave me." Arthur Harrison looked at her, and for the first time that day, a genuine, if small, smile touched his lips. He saw the change in her, the steel in her spine revealing itself. The granddaughter he had tried to shield from the business world to preserve her sweetness was now ready to enter the arena, not by inheritance, but by choice. "They think they've won," he continued, the strategist within him awakening from his shock. "A perfect plan depends on all variables being controlled. They controlled J.R., the company, me, but they don't control you, Lucy. You are the variable they didn't account for." The car remained parked in front of her building, a cocoon of silence in the noisy city. "James and I built our businesses in different eras. I adapted, diversified. My fortune is in stocks, investment funds, gold. Even crypto assets my advisor insists are the future. James isn't like that. He's old school. His entire net worth, all his assets, are tied up in the development firm. It's his kingdom and his prison. He is betting everything, his family's entire legacy, on this one play. That makes him desperate," Lucy concluded. "And desperate people make mistakes." "Exactly," Harrison said, tapping the blue folder lightly. "Their plan was brilliant, but it was reactive. It was built around my reaction. But what they don't know is that while they were setting this trap, I was doing my own homework. I didn't trust J.R. I asked Robert, the CFO, to do a discrete analysis of some older projects, just to make sure the company's foundation was solid." He leaned forward, the energy returning to him, his sharp mind back in focus. Robert found something strange, an anomaly in the accounting books from a project 10 years ago. A project James personally supervised right before he retired. It was a small commercial building, nothing that would draw attention. But the material costs were inflated, well above the market average at the time. The extra money, it vanished. It didn't go to suppliers. It didn't return to the company's cash flow. He looked directly at Lucy, his eyes piercing. "At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just mismanagement. But now, Now, I think it was the first embezzlement, the dress rehearsal for what JR did now. The money wasn't to raise capital, it went into a personal fund. The problem is, the proof isn't in the official records. If it exists, it'll be hidden in James's personal files, in his office. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They won't be expecting a counterattack. They think we're defeated, waiting for tomorrow's meeting for the execution. They'll let their guard down tonight. He glanced at his watch. I'll keep them busy. I'll call James, discuss the terms of surrender. I'll drag out the conversation for as long as I can. And while I'm distracting them, the implication hung in the air, an impossible mission. They wouldn't let me into the office at night, Lucy said, her heart beginning to race with the audacity of the plan. Not you, her grandfather said. The intern who forgot her purse. The idea was so audacious it bordered on insane, to walk back into the lion's den, unarmed, pretending to be the same forgetful intern from hours before. Yet, instead of fear, Lucy felt a strange wave of clarity. The quiet rage inside her sharpened into a cutting focus. The frightened girl who had been humiliated that morning was disappearing, and in her place, a woman she barely recognized was taking control. She and her grandfather spent the next hour in the car, which circled slowly through the quiet neighborhood streets, planning every step with the precision of a watchmaker. Arthur Harrison, the master strategist, laid out the battle map, and Lucy, the quick study, absorbed every detail, every contingency, every possible obstacle. Robert is our only trusted piece on the inside, Harrison said, handing her a tiny, nearly invisible wireless earpiece. And he'll be waiting for my signal to remotely disable the motion sensor in James's office for exactly 10 minutes. You'll have to be fast. They timed everything. Harrison's call to James would be at 8 p.m., ensuring both father and son were focused on him. Lucy would enter the building at 8:05, using the forgotten purse excuse. The night security guard, a man named Carl, knew her by sight, and the story would be plausible enough not to raise suspicion. Once inside, she would have to act naturally, go to her desk, grab her purse, and then, under the pretext of using the restroom, head to James Alden Sirius's office. As night fell, Lucy felt the adrenaline pulsing in her veins. She changed her clothes, putting on the same simple skirt and blouse from the morning, reinforcing the image of the harmless intern. She looked at herself in the mirror. On the outside, she was the same person. Inside, she was a stranger to herself. At exactly 8:05 p.m., she walked into the silent, nearly deserted lobby of the office building. Carl E., the security guard, was at his desk, reading a newspaper. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Miss Lucy, something wrong?" he asked, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Good evening, Carl," she said, forcing a tired smile. "Can you believe I forgot my purse? The day was so crazy I didn't even notice it was gone until now. My keys are inside. I can't even get into my apartment." The lie came out with a naturalness that surprised her. Carl smiled, understanding. "Happens to the best of us, kid. Go on up, just don't be too long. The alarm system on all floors activates at 9. "Promise I'll be quick. Thanks." She passed through the turnstile and called the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every sound seemed amplified in the building's silence. The hum of the elevator ascending was a crescendo of tension. When the doors opened on the Alden Holdings floor, darkness greeted her. Only the emergency lights cast a ghostly glow on the empty desks. The office, once a stage for human drama, was now a silent, intimidating set. She walked to her desk, picked up the cheap purse she had left behind on purpose, and slung it over her shoulder. It was her alibi. Then, she turned and walked in the opposite direction of the elevator, toward the hallway leading to James's office. Every step was calculated. She slipped the small earpiece in. "I'm on my way," she whispered, knowing her grandfather was listening on the other end, fighting his own verbal battle with James. She reached the dark wooden door. It was locked, as expected. From her purse, she pulled out a small bobby pin, a skill she'd learned in her teens out of pure mischief that now became crucial. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was focused. After a few seconds that felt like hours, she heard a soft click. The door was open. She slipped inside, closing it behind her, and plunged into total darkness. "I'm in," she whispered. "Robert, now!" Her grandfather's voice came through her earpiece. A small red light from a motion sensor in the corner of the room blinked and went out. The 10-minute timer had started. Using her phone's flashlight, she began the search. Where would a man like James Alden hide his darkest secret? Not in the safe. That was too obvious. It had to be something personal, something only he would understand. Her gaze scanned the room, the desk, the bookshelves, and then she saw it. The small model sailboat on the desk. It was the same one from the painting. She approached and picked it up carefully. It looked normal. But something about its weight was wrong. It was too heavy for a simple model. She turned it over and, on the underside of the hull, found a tiny, almost imperceptible seam. With her fingernail, she pried it open. The hull split in two, revealing a hollow compartment, and inside, a single metal flash drive. The metal flash drive was cool and heavy in Lucy's palm. There, in that tiny object, lay the key to unraveling a decade of secrets. Her heart was beating so loudly she could hear it in her own ears, a steady drum against the silence of the dark office. She quickly closed the sailboat's hull and placed it back on the desk in the exact same position. "I have it," she whispered into the earpiece, her voice a thread of tension. "It's a flash drive. It was hidden in the model's sailboat." "Excellent, Princess. Now get out of there. Fast!" Her grandfather's voice sounded, laced with urgency. She turned toward the door, but at that exact moment, a sound made her freeze. The unmistakable sound of an elevator arriving on the floor. An icy terror shot down her spine. Who could it be? The security guard. Someone who came back for something, just like her. Her 10 minutes weren't up yet, but her luck seemed to have run out. She switched off her phone's flashlight, and the darkness enveloped her completely. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, slow and deliberate. They were getting closer to the office she was in. Lucy shrank back into the shadows, taking refuge behind a thick velvet curtain covering the window. Her whole body was trembling. She gripped the flash drive so tightly she could feel the metal edges digging into her skin. The doorknob turned. The door opened, and a silhouette was framed against the dim light of the hallway. The figure stepped into the room and, instead of turning on the lights, closed the door, plunging the space back into darkness. Lucy held her breath, the air burning in her lungs. Then the light from a phone screen flickered on, illuminating the intruder's face. It was J.R., but not the arrogant, furious J.R. She knew. This was a haunted man. There were deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his expression was a mixture of fear and desperation. He didn't look like a predator, but like a cornered animal. He walked to his father's desk, picked up the model sailboat, and with trembling hands opened the secret compartment. When he saw it was empty, a guttural sound of pure despair escaped his lips. He dropped the model back on the desk with a dull thud. "No. No, no, no," he muttered to himself, running his hands through his hair in a panic. He leaned on the desk, his head bowed, the very picture of defeat. In that moment, hidden in the shadows, Lucy didn't see the monster who had humiliated her. She saw a broken man, a son who had gone too far to follow his father's orders and was now about to pay the price. A pang of pity, unexpected and unwelcome, struck her. But there was no time for that. She had to get out of there. J.R. Despair, however, took a new turn. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Dad?" he said, his voice cracking. "Dad, it's gone. The flash drive. It's not here." There was a pause as he listened to the reply from the other end. J.R.'s face contorted even more. "I don't know. I came straight here, like you said. Someone took it. Someone knows." Another pause. "Yeah, I know what that means. he said, his voice almost a sob. "It means we're ruined." Behind the curtain, Lucy heard a sound in her earpiece. Her grandfather's voice. "The sensor light comes back on in 30 seconds. Lucy, you have to get out of there now." The panic returned with full force. J.R. was between her and the door. There was no way out. She looked around desperately, and her eyes fell on the heavy leather-bound book on the desk, the one she had noticed earlier. It was a volume on architectural history. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct, she stretched out her foot and gave the leg of the small side table next to the curtain a gentle nudge, just enough to make it wobble. The heavy book, which was balanced on the edge, fell to the floor with a loud, dull thud. J.R. jumped, startled, spinning around toward the sound. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice shrill with fear. As he moved toward the noise, Lucy saw her chance. Silent as a shadow, she slipped out from behind him, reached the door, turned the knob with infinite care, and slipped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her with a nearly inaudible click. She didn't run. She forced herself to walk at a normal pace toward the elevator, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She could hear J.R. inside the office, shouting and fumbling in the dark. She pressed the elevator button, praying it would come quickly. Every second was torture. The doors finally slid open. She stepped inside, and as she turned, she saw the door to James's office swing open. J.R. appeared in the hallway, his face a mask of fury and confusion. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, just as the elevator doors began to close, hiding her from his view. But in that brief instant, she saw the recognition dawn in his eyes, and he saw the flash drive in her hand. The elevator ride down was the longest journey of Lucy's life. The image of J.R.'s face, contorted with the horrifying realization of what she held, was seared into her mind. The game was over. The charade had collapsed, and now all that remained was raw, desperate reality. She clutched the flash drive, the small piece of metal feeling like a hot coal in her palm. This wasn't just data, it was justice. It was the future of hundreds of employees. It was the key to dismantling a deception built on greed and pride. The elevator doors opened onto the silent lobby. Carl, the security guard, looked up from his paper and smiled. "Back already, kid." "That was fast." "Yes, Carl. Thank you so much," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly as she walked toward the exit, forcing herself to maintain a calm pace. She was almost there, just a few more steps to the revolving glass doors and the safety of the street. "Stop!" a voice roared behind her. Lucy's blood ran cold. She didn't have to turn to know it was J.R. The doors of the other elevator had opened, and he was stalking across the lobby toward her, his face a mask of pure rage. "This woman is a thief!" he yelled, his voice echoing off the marble floor. "She stole company property! Carl, stop her!" Carl stood up, his expression a mix of confusion and alarm. He looked from the enraged CEO to the terrified intern. Lucy froze, her escape route blocked by the approaching figure of J.R. "Mr. Alden, what's going on?" the guard asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "She broke into my father's office. She has a drive with confidential information. Get it from her." J.R. commanded, lunging for Lucy. She backed away, pressing herself against the cold glass of the entrance. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight him, and she couldn't explain the situation to the guard without revealing the entire conspiracy. She was trapped. "J.R.," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror she felt. "Stop. You're making a huge mistake." "The mistake was my father ever letting you into this building," he spat, his eyes fixed on her clenched fist. "Give me that. This is your last warning." He reached for her, his fingers about to close around hers. In that split second, 100 thoughts flooded her mind. The risk her grandfather had taken, the trust Robert had placed in her, the intricate web of lies that put the company's entire net worth at risk. She couldn't fail now. She braced herself for the struggle, But before his hand could touch her, the revolving glass doors spun with force. 3 figures strode into the lobby, their presence instantly changing the balance of power. In the lead, with the posture of a king retaking his throne, was Arthur Harrison. At his side, holding a briefcase and wearing a steely expression, was Robert. And just behind them, a man in an expensive suit Lucy didn't recognize, but who exuded the unmistakable aura of a seasoned lawyer, J.R. His jaw dropped. He froze, his hands suspended in mid-air, the rage on his face being replaced by a pale terror. He looked from Lucy's grandfather to the CFO who had betrayed him and knew that the trap he and his father had set had just snapped shut, but on them. Arthur Harrison didn't look at J.R. His eyes went straight to Lucy, a silent question in his gaze. Lucy opened her hand, revealing the small, metal flash drive. A flicker of relief crossed her grandfather's face before it hardened into a mask of cold determination. He then turned to J.R., and his voice, calm and cutting, filled the lobby's silence. "It seems, J.R., that you've lost something that didn't belong to you. Then again, that seems to be a habit of yours." The lobby of Alden Holdings transformed into a silent courtroom. Time seemed to freeze. J.R. remained motionless, his hand still outstretched, a pathetic gesture of an authority he no longer possessed. Disbelief paralyzed his features, his eyes darting from the imposing figure of Arthur Harrison to the impassive face of Robert, the quiet traitor. The lawyer beside Harrison stepped forward, his presence calm but unshakable. He opened his leather briefcase, the sound of the metal clasp echoing like a verdict. "James Alden, Jr.," the lawyer said, his voice clear and emotionless. "I believe this tumultuous evening can come to a swift and private conclusion." He held out his hand to Lucy, who, without hesitation, placed the flash drive in his palm. The lawyer inserted the drive into a tablet he pulled from his case. The screen lit up, and he turned it for J.R. to see. "This device," he continued, "contains not only the detailed financial records of the capital diversion that you and your father orchestrated, but also something far more conclusive." He tapped the screen, and the voice of James Alden Sr. filled the silence, an unmistakable audio recording. "The perfect bait, J.R. Harrison's pride won't let him ignore his granddaughter's humiliation. He'll act impulsively, and when he does, the clause is ours. The company comes back to us, and with the capital we've moved, we can finally clear our name and rebuild our legacy." J.R.'s recorded voice replied, full of the arrogance Lucy knew so well. "And the girl, what happens to her after?" "Who cares?" came the voice of James Sr. "She's just a pawn, a means to an end." J.R.'s collapse was total and silent. There were no shouts, no denials, just a hollow sound, the sound of a man breaking from the inside out. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees on the polished marble floor, the sharp crack of his kneecaps on the stone a dull echo of his ruin. The rage, the arrogance, all of it dissolved, leaving behind only the empty shell of a defeated man. The lawyer switched off the tablet. "We have email exchanges, more recordings, a complete digital trail of your conspiracy," he said coldly. "You and your father have 2 options. First, we make all of this public. The fraud, the conspiracy, the manipulation. The Alden name will be dragged through the mud, your legacy destroyed forever, and you will both face litigation that will consume what's left of your assets. The second option, you sign these documents." He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and placed them on a nearby low table. They represent the immediate and irrevocable transfer of all Alden family shares and assets in the firm to a new trust, controlled by Mr. Harrison, as compensation for damages and attempted fraud. In return, this evidence disappears. You walk away with what's in your personal accounts and nothing more. The company, the name, everything is left behind. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to decide. J.R. didn't move. He just knelt there, his gaze lost in the void. Lucy watched the scene, not with triumph, but with a deep and overwhelming sadness. She had seen his humiliation that morning and felt nothing. Now, seeing his complete disintegration, she felt the weight of that destruction. It was the end of a dynasty, the crumbling of a family. Arthur Harrison gave a discreet nod to Carl, who, still stunned, stepped forward and helped a catatonic J.R. to his feet, guiding him like a lost child toward the exit. The lobby fell silent once more. Robert and the lawyer discreetly stepped away, leaving Lucy alone with her grandfather. He came to her and placed his hands on her shoulders, the pride in his eyes mixed with the fatigue of the won battle. "Yeah, it's over, princess," he said softly. "You did it. You saved the company. You saved us all." Lucy looked around the empty lobby at the name Alden Holdings etched in gold letters on the wall. Everything they had fought for that night was right there. She felt the weight of the invisible crown that now rested on her head. Her grandfather watched her, seeing the storm of emotions on her face. "What will you do now, my princess? The company is yours, if you want it." His grandfather's question hung in the air, not as a challenge, but as a genuine gift, the culmination of a journey she had never asked for, but which had irrevocably transformed her. "The company is yours, if you want it." She looked at the gold lettering on the wall, at the shadows of the great hall that now belonged to her, and felt the weight of that empire, the money, the fortune, the power. It was all within her grasp. She could become the new queen of this castle of glass and steel. But as she looked inside herself, she saw that the throne didn't fit. The victory hadn't brought her a desire for power, but a profound clarity about who she was and what truly mattered. The girl who just wanted a normal life hadn't vanished. She had only been strengthened, forged in the fires of adversity. "I don't want the company, Grandpa," she said, her voice calm and sure, echoing the certainty in her heart. "At least, not as CEO. That's not who I am." A tender, understanding smile lit up Arthur Harrison's face. He didn't look surprised, only proud. "I know," he said, "and that's why you're the only person I trust to lead it." Lucy looked at him, confused. "What I want," she continued, organizing the thoughts that had crystallized in her mind during the crisis, "is to create something new from this. I want the company to have a purpose greater than just profit and dividends. I want the vast capital we have to be used for good. I want to create a foundation." The idea flowed from her with a passion that surprised her. A foundation that will use the firm's expertise to build quality housing for low-income families. "I want to use a portion of the profits to fund scholarships for young people like me who have dreams but not the means. I want the Alden name to be associated not with humiliation and greed, but with hope and opportunity." She looked at her grandfather, her eyes shining with a new light. "I don't want to sit in the CEO's chair. I want Robert in there. He's competent, loyal, and has everyone's respect. I want to be on the board, Grandpa. I want to be the guardian of this company's soul, ensuring our net worth is measured not just in dollars and cents, but in the positive impact we create. That's the kind of wealth I want to build." Arthur Harrison listened to her, and the tears he hadn't shed in decades of business battles now glistened in his eyes. He no longer saw his little princess. He saw an extraordinary woman, a natural leader whose strength came not from arrogance, but from compassion. He pulled her into a hug, a strong embrace full of a love that transcended any business or fortune. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the best investment, the one with the highest return I have ever seen in my entire life." The next morning, news of the sudden retirement of J.R. and James Alden and the company's restructuring spread like wildfire. Robert took over as CEO, to the relief and acclaim of the employees. Lucy, now a board member and president of the newly formed Alden Harrison Foundation, returned to the office, not as an intern, but as the organization's moral compass. She didn't move into the chairman's office. She remained at her modest desk in the corner, a constant reminder of her origins and her mission. The first sale of the luxury development on Billionaires Row closed that same week. The buyer, Mr. Harrison himself, he turned the most expensive apartment, the penthouse with the sweeping city views, into the new headquarters for the foundation, a powerful symbol that even the pinnacle of luxury could be used in the service of a greater good. Lucy's story became a quiet legend within the company, a tale of resilience and integrity that inspired a new culture of respect and collaboration. She had proven that true power wasn't in having the greatest net worth, the most valuable stocks, or the richest inheritance, but in having the courage to be kind in a cruel world and the wisdom to know that the greatest asset of all is human connection.